Imagine this. A black woman CEO takes her VIP seat on a flight, only to be told she has to give it up for a white passenger. What happens next is shocking. One phone call changes everything, and the entire flight crew is fired. Stay with me to hear the full story of how quiet strength turned a moment of unfairness into a powerful lesson the world won't forget. Danielle Harper remained calm. The cabin was quiet, the lighting soft, and the subtle hum of the aircraft surrounded her like background noise. She had just settled into Seat 1A, a private first-class suite that came with champagne on arrival, direct service, and space to stretch out for the long-haul flight ahead. Then came a voice, soft but firm, dressed in a polite smile, yet holding a different message beneath the surface. "Ma'am, this seat isn't yours." Danielle looked up. She wasn't confused. She wasn't startled. She was simply surprised. Because yes, this was absolutely her seat. Her boarding pass, tucked neatly into her hand, read exactly what she expected. Danielle Harper, Seat 1A, VIP priority passenger. She handed it over with a warm, measured smile. Nothing hostile, nothing loud, just clarity. The flight attendant glanced at the ticket, quickly, almost reluctantly, then looked away. "There's been a mix-up," she said. "We're going to need you to switch seats." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." That's when the attendant motioned toward a man standing just behind her. White, middle-aged, wearing an expensive watch, but no patience on his face. He didn't speak. He just stood there with his arms folded, like he expected this to be handled. "And fast. He's one of our top elite members," the attendant continued. "We'd really appreciate it if you could help us out and take another seat." Help them out? Give up her rightful place? Not because of a system error, not because she was late, but because this man, a stranger, felt he was more entitled to sit there? Danielle felt it then. That unspoken pressure in the air, the kind that doesn't shout but hums, subtly, persistently, in rooms where people don't expect you to belong. This wasn't just an ask. It was a demand dressed as a favor. She breathed in slowly, letting the moment settle. Then she sat up straighter, her voice calm but commanding. "I'm not moving." She looked the attendant in the eye. "This is my seat, and I won't be giving it up." There was no drama in her voice, no anger, just a woman who knew exactly what she had paid for and what she deserved. But the crew didn't let it go. They hovered, insisted, tried to make her feel like she was the problem, that her resistance was an inconvenience. What they didn't know was, they weren't just talking to another passenger. They were talking to Danielle Harper, CEO of a billion-dollar marketing firm with offices across 4 continents. She wasn't just a name on the flight list. She was one of the airline's largest corporate partners. Her company had just signed a multi-million-dollar sponsorship with their international brand division. And yet, in this moment, they didn't see that. They didn't see the executive. They didn't see the leader. They only saw someone they thought they could pressure. Danielle didn't argue. She didn't shout. Instead, she pulled out her phone and made one quiet call. Not to a supervisor, not to the help desk, but to someone on the board, someone she had just had dinner with last quarter. She explained the situation with total calm, her voice barely above a whisper. The call lasted under a minute. Her contact's response? "Say no more. We'll handle it." And that's exactly what happened. What followed next would stun every passenger on board. The plane, already preparing for takeoff, came to a halt. A formal announcement came through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a short delay. Thank you for your patience." Within moments, a new team of officials boarded the aircraft. No fuss, no confrontation, just quiet authority. They walked straight to the front of the cabin, where the crew involved in the situation stood, awkward, uncertain. Now realizing this was no ordinary flyer. Each staff member was asked to gather their belongings. They were removed from the flight. Right then, right there, passengers watched in stunned silence. Whispers filled the cabin. Phones came out. People began posting, tweeting, sharing what they had just witnessed. Danielle said nothing. She simply leaned back in her seat, opened her laptop, and began reviewing notes for the business meeting waiting for her in London. No drama, no revenge, Just quiet power, fully in control. Because this wasn't about the seat. It was about what the seat represented: presence, respect, equality. Danielle Harper had earned it, and she wasn't giving it up. Danielle Harper didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't clap back. She didn't ask for a manager or start filming. No, Danielle didn't need to. She simply took a slow breath, reached into her designer handbag, and pulled out her phone. No panic, no performance, just quiet precision. Around her, the flight crew continued to insist she switch seats, talking among themselves, whispering, unaware of who they were dealing with. But Danielle? She wasn't about to explain herself to people who didn't care to listen. She didn't call customer service. She didn't flag down the gate agent. Instead, with a quick scroll through her contacts, she tapped a name that would change everything. The president of the airline's parent company. Yes, that high up. Why? Because Danielle Harper wasn't just a frequent flyer. She wasn't just another business class passenger. She was the CEO of one of the most powerful marketing firms in the world, a company that happened to be one of the largest stakeholders in the airline's international expansion initiative. In fact, she hadn't just flown with this airline before. She had been personally invited to serve on their global advisory board. Her firm was behind the billion-dollar branding campaign that helped them enter markets in Asia, Africa, and Europe. She wasn't just on the flight. She was one of the reasons the flight existed. And yet here she was, being asked, no pressured, to give up her rightful seat for someone who looked more like what they expected a VIP to be. She pressed the call button. It rang once. Then came a voice, calm, familiar, and professional. Danielle, everything okay? She kept her tone even. I'm on one of your aircraft. I was just told I need to give up my VIP seat for another passenger, despite having a valid ticket and confirmation. I just wanted to let you know, in case this becomes public. Silence for a beat. Then just 3 words. We'll take care of it. No explanation needed. No questions. Just immediate understanding. Danielle didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just ended the call, placed her phone back in her bag, and resumed sipping her tea as if nothing had happened. But behind the scenes, everything was already in motion. 15 minutes passed. The plane, which had been preparing to taxi, suddenly came to a halt. An announcement played softly over the cabin speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a short delay. Please remain seated and stay buckled while we resolve an operational issue. Whispers start D. Passengers looked around, puzzled. Then the front cabin doors opened, and in walked 3 senior airline officials, flanked by 2 security officers. They moved quickly, quietly, straight to the flight crew at the front. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just a quiet exchange of words, firm and final. Moments later, the very same crew members who had questioned Danielle's presence in seat 1A were asked to gather their belongings. They were removed from the flight, every last one of them who had been involved in the incident grounded. The man who had expected to take Danielle's seat, he shrunk into his own, trying to avoid eye contact, while other passengers looked on in stunned silence. Danielle, she didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't speak. She simply leaned back in her chair, adjusted her scarf, and opened her laptop to begin preparing for the keynote presentation she was flying across the world to deliver. She wasn't there to teach anyone a lesson. She wasn't there to get anyone fired. She was there to take her seat, the one she had earned, paid for, and rightfully belonged in. And in that moment, she reminded everyone watching loudly, without ever raising her voice. Real power doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply makes one call, and lets the world adjust. The engines were humming. Passengers had buckled their seatbelts. The flight attendants were running final checks. Everything seemed normal. The plane was already taxiing toward the runway. Danielle Harper sat quietly in seat 1A, her expression calm. Her phone was tucked away. Her tea was nearly finished. Her laptop sat closed on the table in front of her. You'd never guess that, just moments ago, she had been the center of an incident that would change everything for the airline crew on board. Then, something unexpected happened. The plane came to a sudden stop. A soft chime rang overhead, followed by a measured voice on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, We are experiencing a brief operational delay. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Whispers rippled through the cabin. People looked around. Something didn't feel right. Danielle didn't flinch. She simply leaned back in her chair, her legs crossed, perfectly composed, as if she already knew what was coming. And then, just moments later, the cabin door opened. It wasn't more flight attendants. It wasn't late passengers. It was 3 senior airline officials, suited, serious, and flanked by 2 members of airport security. No one said a word. They walked down the aisle with quiet authority, stopping just short of first class. Passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. A hush fell over the cabin. The officials didn't yell. They didn't demand. There was no dramatic confrontation. Just a few quiet words exchanged with the lead flight attendant, barely a whisper. Then came the moment no one expected. One by one, the crew members involved in pressuring Danielle Harper to give up her seat were asked to gather their belongings. Their confusion was obvious. So was their embarrassment. They tried to mask it, to keep it professional, but the entire cabin could see the shift. They were being removed from the flight. All of them. No shouting, no debate, just quiet, swift consequences. Within minutes, they were off the aircraft. And then another surprise, a replacement crew, already waiting at the next gate, boarded the aircraft. They took their position seamlessly, ready to serve without a word about what had just happened. Passengers sat in stunned silence. Phones were down. Conversations paused. No one had ever seen anything like it. But one person wasn't surprised. Danielle Harper, the woman who had politely refused to give up her first-class seat. The woman who had stayed calm, made one call, and let the truth do the rest. She didn't smirk. She didn't celebrate. She simply remained seated, graceful, composed, and completely unfazed. Across the aisle, the white man who had expected to take her seat, the so-called elite member the crew had tried to appease, sat in quiet shame. He didn't say a word for the rest of the flight. Not to the crew, not to his neighbors, not even to Danielle, whose poise had spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. Because what he and the crew didn't realize until it was too late was that Danielle Harper wasn't just a regular passenger. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar marketing empire, a major investor in the airline's global campaign, a trusted voice on the airline's international advisory board. She didn't have to argue. She didn't have to shout. She didn't have to prove anything. She just made one call and let her reputation do the talking. As the flight finally took off, passengers stared forward, still processing what had happened. But somewhere deep inside, they knew they'd just witnessed something rare. A moment when quiet power answered loud injustice. A moment when class, dignity, and presence said more than outrage ever could. A moment when a black woman in power refused to be moved, literally and figuratively, and the world had no choice but to adjust. Danielle Harper didn't just keep her seat. She claimed her space. And she reminded everyone on that plane, and now, everyone watching this story, that when you know your worth, you never have to give it up. The flight landed smoothly. Passengers gathered their things, filed out of the cabin, and headed toward baggage claim. But the energy in the air was different. They had just witnessed something they'd never forget. A black woman, calm, composed, dignified, stand her ground in the face of quiet discrimination. And not just stand her ground, but make a single phone call that resulted in the entire flight crew being removed before takeoff. It was bold, it was graceful, and it was powerful. And as people walked off that plane, their phones came out. Photos, tweets, whispered voice recordings. "You won't believe what just happened on my flight. Black woman CEO refused to give up her seat, and the crew was fired. She made one call. They replaced the crew." Within hours, posts began to circulate online. By the next morning, the story had gone viral. Hashtag Seat1A was trending across platforms: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn. People everywhere were talking. Why did they ask her to move in the first place? Would they have done the same if she looked different? This is what quiet power looks like. Videos surfaced, screenshots, witness accounts. Everyone wanted to know who she was. This woman who didn't shout, didn't film, didn't fight, but still won. Her name was soon revealed: Danielle Harper, CEO of a billion-dollar global marketing firm, advisor to Fortune 100 companies, major investor in the airline's international campaigns, board member, philanthropist, strategist, leader, and now, a symbol of unshakable dignity in the face of discrimination. By the end of the week, news outlets had picked up the story. Editorials were written. Influencers weighed in. The airline's official response came quickly. They issued a formal public apology, confirming that the staff members involved had been terminated. They pledged a global review of all internal policies, announced a rollout of bias and equity training, and committed to increasing diversity at the leadership level. It was the kind of response that only happens when the pressure becomes too loud to ignore. But Danielle, she didn't go on a podcast. She didn't speak to reporters. She didn't even make a video. She didn't need to. Instead, she posted one message on her professional page. Just a few lines. No hashtags. No tags. No callouts. It simply read, "Real power is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It just makes one call and lets the results speak for themselves." No rage. No gloating. Just truth, wrapped in calm conviction. Within hours, the post began to spread. Within days, it had reached over 12 million people. CEOs reposted it. Authors quoted it. Young women of color shared it with pride, because Danielle hadn't just kept her seat. She had claimed something bigger, a moment that revealed the quiet strength of self-worth. She had turned what could have been just another overlooked act of bias into a lesson for every corporation that believed they could get away with it. And she did it with elegance, with restraint, with power. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a mirror, a reflection of how far we still have to go, and how much difference one woman, standing her ground without raising her voice, can make. She reminded the world that sometimes the most profound actions don't come from protests or podiums. They come from knowing your value, holding your space, and saying no when it matters most. Danielle Harper didn't tell the world what power looks like. She showed them. And the world, they listened. What happened on that plane wasn't just a question of who sat where. It was about something far bigger. A system, subtle, unspoken, and stubborn, that still makes assumptions. Assumptions about who belongs, who deserves, and who should move aside. For Danielle Harper, the CEO of a billion-dollar company, it was a daily reality she had long learned to navigate. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. When the flight attendant asked her to give up her VIP seat for another passenger, a white man who claimed entitlement without question, it was a moment that revealed more than just poor customer service. It revealed the invisible barriers that many still face, even when holding the highest titles and the most impressive credentials. Danielle didn't lose her temper. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. Instead, she held something more powerful: her confidence, her professionalism, her quiet strength. She showed the world that sometimes the most effective resistance doesn't come from confrontation or loud outrage. It comes from calm, unwavering conviction. When she was pressured to move, Danielle simply pulled out her phone, not to film or rant, but to make one quiet call to the president of the airline's parent company. A call that led to swift action, and the entire flight crew being removed before takeoff. She didn't shout. She didn't demand. She just showed her power, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be heard. This moment on the plane became a lesson in how true power often wears heels and carries a phone. It's not about who yells the loudest or who draws the most attention. It's about knowing your worth and standing firm, no matter how subtle the pressure or how deeply rooted the bias. Danielle Harper's story quickly went viral, inspiring millions worldwide. #Seat1A became a symbol of dignity and strength. People saw in her not just a woman protecting her seat, but a leader breaking down walls. Because for every person who witnessed the event, the message was clear: assumptions don't define us. Our response does. Her calm defiance challenged an outdated system and showed the world what respect looks like when it's demanded without aggression. And that's what made the story so powerful. It wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about changing perceptions. It was about proving that professionalism and quiet determination can break through even the most subtle forms of bias. Danielle didn't need to prove herself to anyone, but by simply being herself, she proved something vital to the world. Power isn't always flashy. It's not always loud. Sometimes real power is quiet, confident, and unshakable. And in that quiet power, Danielle Harper reminded everyone watching, you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight to be respected. You just have to stand firm, know your worth, and let the world catch up. Thanks for watching. Danielle's story reminds us that real strength is calm and confident. Sometimes, standing your ground quietly is the most powerful thing you can do. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring stories. And drop a comment below. Have you ever had a moment where staying calm made all the difference? I'd love to hear. See you in the next video.